Welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole
and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and we're here to interview world-leading researchers, clinicians, and people with lived experience
to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's another week, and that means another episode of the Research Works podcast. Hello, Dana.
Hi, Ash. I love being here.
Me
Here we
too.
go again.
It's the best part of the week for sure.
I think so too, and I always love doing these with you, so we get to spend more time with each other.
Yeah, we get to spend more time with each other, but today we are also travelling virtually to Switzerland.
We are indeed.
And we welcome from Switzerland Dr. Nathalie de Beukelaer onto our podcast. Welcome, Nathalie.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's really nice to be here.
Oh, it's nice to have you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us early in the morning.
Very early in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're really excited to talk to you about this paper, Nathalie. It's had some great mentions in some conference presentations recently.
Yes.
The paper is titled Longitudinal Trajectory of Medial Gastrocnemius Muscle Growth in the First Years of Life. So the paper was published in Developmental Medicine and Child Neurology in 2024, and it has a rather outstanding authorship group attached to it, if we do say so.
Yeah, what an amazing team.
Yeah. But before we get into it, let's introduce everyone to our guest, Nathalie. Nathalie is a postdoctoral researcher at the Kinesiology Laboratory, or K-Lab, of the University of Geneva, where she investigates neurobiomechanical determinants in infants at high risk for motor impairments. And she also works at KU Leuven in Belgium in the Pronto Research Lab on a project investigating early visual development in relation to bimanual control in preterm born infants during the first 2 years of life. Nathalie earned her Master of Science in Physiotherapy and Rehabilitation Sciences and completed her PhD in Biomedical Sciences at KU Leuven in November 2022. Since joining K-Lab in February 2023, her research has focused on the early detection of abnormal motor function by integrating movement analysis, brain imaging, and muscle ultrasound. Her work is particularly relevant to conditions such as cerebral palsy and prematurity, aiming to enhance early intervention strategies in paediatric populations.
Impressive.
Very impressive.
Very cool. I love that, Nathalie.
So, Nathalie, that's the formal part of getting to know you, but we, of course, like to do an informal getting to know you as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so our icebreaker question for today is, if you could swap lives with someone else for just one day, who would it be?
Well, I would choose Michelle Obama, I think.
Oh!
She's a very inspiring woman. Yeah. She was on the side for a president, and I think I'm very fascinated by her way of living and her daily activities and the inspiration she has for other women. I think would be interesting to see what she's doing on one day and the people she's meeting and the talk she's giving.
Yeah.
So that will be a cool day of my life.
I love that. I love that you're using it for professional development as well.
Yeah.
Very good.
That is really impressive because where my brain wasn't
That's not where my
professional
brain.
development.
Yeah. I think that is an excellent choice. I think that
so
could be the best answer to the question that you could have. Go on, Dana. Nathalie set the bar quite high, so good luck.
So look, mine doesn't quite match that, but look, all I'm going to do is do Max Verstappen.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it'll be so interesting to do something completely different to what I do, to be in the top of your game and to just the preparation before a race and especially when it's raining and what the adrenaline must feel like, because I'm just, I'm never going to do something like that ever. And I don't have spatial awareness the way that most people probably have. So I think it would be amazing to see what that would feel like. It's just for a day, a bit any more.
So
than
race
that.
day?
Race day. But raining, because, Max Verstappen's really good when it's raining.
Okay, yeah.
So you really want to see.
I did not know this, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great advantage when it's raining, and you can just, I don't know, it'll be something, because when it's raining here, I'm not going to drive fast. Drive speed limit, maybe a little bit slower, but I'm a bit more careful. But he goes faster. What's that like? What goes through his brain?
Yeah.
But how? Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
So there you go. That was mine. So you see how that wasn't professional development. Oh,
mine is definitely
yours?
not professional development.
What's yours?
So I recently spent a few days in Margaret River in Western Australia at the time
Wine
that
region, lovely.
the Margaret River Pro was on, which is a World Surfing League competition. And I watched the professional surfers just get out there and do their thing. And
paddle into the deep water.
Paddle into the water, jump up on the board like it was absolutely nothing, surf the waves. And I realized that they get to do something that they absolutely love. And if they win, get paid lots and lots of money for it.
That would be pretty cool.
And I thought, how good would it be to be a professional surfer and compete?
Yeah.
Or, some days they just don't. Like the competition goes for 10 days because sometimes the surf's just not good. So if it gets called off, you get to just go and check out a winery.
The world. Yeah. And it's like an endless summer.
Yeah. It's an elite sporting competition, but it just feels really relaxed.
Really relaxed. Yeah. I like that.
And I like the ethos and no one really takes themselves very seriously. And it's,
Sing some Jack Johnson around the fire with, do kids still listen to Jack Johnson?
The kids don't. No,
we do though. Okay. So we're going to listen to Jack Johnson.
Maybe they do. Maybe it's been so long that
maybe it's come back again. Yeah. Oh, well, I like the range. We've both gone for just the different
sporting
kinds of
prowess. But
that's right. But your answer, Nathalie, was very, very good.
Definitely.
Very impressive. Okay, well, should we get into the study?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, here we have a bit of a summary of what we'll be talking about today. This longitudinal study investigated how the medial gastrocnemius muscle develops in children aged 6 to 36 months, comparing typically developing children with those diagnosed with spastic cerebral palsy. Using repeated three-dimensional freehand ultrasound assessments, the researchers observed that children with spastic cerebral palsy had significantly smaller muscle volume and cross-sectional area as early as 12 months of age. And while overall muscle growth rates were similar between groups, those with more severe motor impairments, as in GMFCS levels 3 through to 4, exhibited notably reduced growth trajectories, suggesting that functional motor level plays a critical role in muscle development. Interestingly, muscle growth patterns did not differ significantly based on the presumed timing of the brain lesion, that being early versus late. And the findings highlight the need for early muscle monitoring and targeted interventions during infancy, emphasizing the importance of motor function in shaping musculoskeletal development in children with cerebral palsy.
Fascinating.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
Love this.
All right, Nathalie, we're going to get right into it with you because we have so many questions about this study. But first of all, I suppose a bit of background. What prompted you to investigate the longitudinal growth of medial gastrocnemius in infants with spastic cerebral palsy?
So in the research group I was working during my PhD, the main focus of the lab was understanding contributing factors to altered gait in older children with CP, and also the reasons why they present spasticity and the treatment for that. And this research pointed that we also have to look to the muscles, knowing that the muscle is actually your driver of a body. We know that from its forces, it's producing force, for example, during walking. And especially the medial gastrocnemius is important for this locomotion. However, we focus then on medial gastrocnemius in mostly cross-sectional databases over different ages. And in this research, we figured out that it's very heterogeneous between age groups. And especially from a young age, it seems to be present. And that's why we had the idea, okay, let's focus on one group of young children to understand if we can figure out how the muscles are growing at these ages. So this is a bit the background of the study. And of course, to understand what is a bit abnormal or altered in muscle volumes, we also have to include a typically developing group of children. So this was a bit from gait to the muscle. This research line was ongoing in the research group.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. And can you just explain to our listeners why it was important that you included infants as young as 6 months of age in this study? You know, what gap were you trying to address with the inclusion of such young infants?
Yeah, so actually in 2015, the team of Herskins from Denmark published as first that muscle growth is altered already from 15 months of age. So that was, for everyone a bit a shock, like, wow, that's very early in life.
Yeah.
But also there, the question is, if we look to more longitudinal study, if we do the follow-up of these young children, would we observe the same results, or could it even be before 15 months? But then, to understand how early it is, it was also our idea. Let's start as early as possible, and this is also within the in line with the diagnosis guidelines. We have to, if possible, do a diagnosis as early as possible. And so, if we could observe also alterations in muscle growth, let's understand if this also happens in an early phase of life. So that's why we try to address a bit this gap with longitudinal data, and investigating as young as possible.
Yeah, it's an interesting time point, isn't it? Because 6 months of age, most infants aren't standing or weight bearing yet. Maybe some are, but typically you wouldn't see that until a little bit later down the track. So, it's a really nice time to try and capture differences, if there are any, that aren't necessarily attributed to activity.
That's so true, before they get up and moving. So you've sort of eliminated that, but at a point of curiosity, if we think it's happening earlier.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting point. Nathalie, I'm really interested about who you included in this study. Obviously, like you said, there's children's cerebral palsy and typical development. Can you just go through a bit of a breakdown of who was in it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so we included like around 20 children with a typical development, and 24 children with a confirmed diagnosis of CP.
Right.
So in the beginning, we included a bit more children, but of course, what we know from the guidelines as well is that we have to meet a confirmation of their diagnosis. So we ended up with 24 children that had a confirmed diagnosis based on the brain lesion, based on clinical symptoms. And then we could divide them in two groups, more the GMFCS level 1s and 2, around 60%, and the other 40% or more the levels 3 to 4, based on the criteria to include them in one of these levels. Also the ages, so we had like around the age of 15 months for the first assessment, with a range of children starting at almost 5 months of age, and others that had only a measurement point more at 2 years of age. So it was a mix of children over an age range between 6 and 36 months.
Interesting. And you obviously used 3D freehand ultrasound. I've got that out of my mouth there. So can you just talk us through what that assessment actually looks like and how frequently you did it over the course of time? Because that's the most interesting factor in this study, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, so for us, we used ultrasound as an alternative actually for an expensive, time-consuming, maybe not so child-friendly MRI, which was before mostly used to assess muscles. But this ultrasound is great because it's portable, it's easy to use in both clinical and research settings. So that was for us also a reason why to use this. And it allows us to not only look to a mid-belly cross-sectional area, but to do a reconstruction in order to obtain a muscle volume. And this is very informative to go beyond just 2D images. And we acquired the data with an interval of 6 months. So some children started at 6 months of age and had every 6 months a measurement. Others started at 15 months of age and had again also each 6 months a measurement. So we had a quite unique data set with a lot of intervals. And that's really great of longitudinal data to have from one child an individual profile.
That's beautiful.
That's great.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And I'm so glad we've got this kind of technology, because as you're saying that, I got a little bit of PTSD there, remembering with my PhD, I had to use MRI for muscle volume. And, it's very costly in preparing the children. You can't really do it until they're a certain age, because you don't want them to go under GA for it. No. So they need to stay really still. And so you can only start at a certain age. But to be able to do it this early for so many children, from as young as 6 months. How valuable is that?
What an amazing data set.
Oh, that's great. I wish that was available, but it's okay. Time has passed. It's been 10 years. It's okay.
But Nathalie, we all know 6-month-olds and 12-month-olds.
Yeah, that's the other one.
And talk to me about the challenges you had in trying to use 3D freehand ultrasound on such young children. Because I don't know, from experience, I think maybe the 6-month-olds could be, if you caught them at the right time, relatively easy to assess. Yeah. But a 12-month-old or an 18-month-old, 15-month-old, potentially a different story. So how did you manage?
So it remains a bit the same with MRI. Of course, we hope that there's no movements, because that could interfere with our data set. Yeah. But that's the good thing with an ultrasound. You can repeat it several times after each other. Okay. It doesn't take so much time, so we can repeat some acquisitions to get sufficient number of images. But we had to be creative with getting some distraction, some toys, some music, sometimes some feeding moments before, and then they will come and fall a bit asleep. So that's also the nice thing. They were for us on the belly, so you can easily distract them a bit with the mothers, with the fathers. It was, so that helps a lot. Like during the acquisition, and this is really different from an MRI, you can distract them to go and engage them a bit. So that's, but for the legs, we try to keep them with some hands from the mother, from another assessor, from me. Then the leg was so that remains a challenge, but because it's so easy to use, you can repeat, and it doesn't take that much time anymore.
And such a great alternative to an MRI. Because, you could go through all the process of preparing a child for an MRI, doing the MRI, and then you get the results back and actually they've moved and it's not quite.
That's right.
Sorry, I'm triggering Dana again. And it's not quite what you had hoped for. So then you kind of have to go back to the drawing board, right? Whereas what you're saying with the ultrasound, you have the opportunity to take as many passes as you can
get that data
to be able to collect it.
Yeah. How good is that?
Yeah. So, and talk to us as well about the assessment of the brain lesion for the children with cerebral palsy, and the timing of that brain lesion. How did you assess that or determine that for each of those children?
So we used MRIs that were collected during clinical follow-up. So that's good. There is a habit in the hospital to take an MRI of all these children, more or less around, if they were born preterm, around term age. And then we assess them based on their presumed predominant patterns. It's in accordance with the MRI-CS, or the classification system of the MRI. And for us, we select the early timing was in the case of more a white matter lesion, while the late timing was more in the case of a gray matter lesion. So we made it like two groups, basically, based on what we could observe as a pattern of brain damage. That was our approach for this study.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I guess it's just good for clarity's perspective, because obviously the very unique component of your study that it's longitudinal rather than cross-sectional. Can you talk us through some of the other advantages, or what are some of the advantages of being longitudinal versus cross-sectional?
Yeah, so it allows us to understand a bit more the variability. Even so, within a child, you can measure growth over time, but also these growth trajectories you can understand between children, because it's also an age with a lot of variability in general in their motor development, but in the growth of their body mass or the body length. So we have to take into account when you measure an infant or a young child that this variability has to be observe could have an influence on the observations that we have seen in a cross-sectional data set. Child of 2 years could be completely different in his body mass, but the muscle volume could be more or less all in the same way. So for that, if you measure longitudinal, you get these unique insights in variability within a child and between children. And that's really the advantage of a longitudinal study.
Yeah, that's interesting as well, isn't it? Because I guess over that time, if you've got that, you've got your age range, they could be having some intervention potentially, and you don't know, like over time, what that might look like. And whereas in one time point, you don't know where they are with when it comes to, I don't know, botulinum toxin, or are they pulling to stand, or are they walking? I think there'll be a lot of factors of that, which is really interesting. Okay, that's cool.
And so, Nathalie, just for listeners who might not have had a chance to read your paper yet, how many times did you follow up with the children in your study? So how many ultrasounds did they have, or did it depend on when they were recruited into?
Exactly, yeah. So it was a maximum of 5 if they started at the young age. We had like more or less 2 to 5 assessments for each child. So minimum was 2 and the maximum was around 5. So that's that's great, I think. To have like a minimum of 2.
Absolutely.
To have this longitudinal study.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you. So let's get into the results and talk first of all about the onset of muscle deficit. So your study highlighted that differences in muscle volume and cross-sectional area were already present by 12 months of age. How confident can we be that the onset of these deficits happens even earlier?
Yeah. So based on our data set, and actually we had a bit of limited data before 12 months of age, we were not able to observe this. But it is for us also the hypothesis that it would be present earlier, especially those who are having a GMFCS level 3 to 4. If we make like an interpolation of the data more to the earlier ages, we have this hypothesis that it's earlier than 12 months.
So do you think we should be considering whether spastic cerebral palsy is solely a neurological condition, or is it potentially neuromuscular? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's also a debate we have in our group. Like, well, the brain lesion is present from an early age, and we think that it's not only having consequences for posture and movements, but also that during this early stage it could influence the formation and the innervation of a muscle. So we couldn't solely. Yeah, for us it was the idea that it's not solely a neurological impairment, but the neurological development is in interaction with your muscle development. So I think this, and it's the same bit for the spasticity and the contracture. There is an interaction in your neurological deficits with your muscular system, which is even also observed at the cellular level. So for us it's a neuromotor or neuromuscular impairment, not the same as with a muscular disorder. But there is an interaction, and I think we cannot ignore that so much anymore.
It's such an interesting finding, isn't it? Especially when you delve into your results, and you certainly have a difference between GMFCS level 1 and 2 versus children GMFCS level 3 and 4. So, I mean, it sounds like your team had great debates, which I wish I could have been there for. But can you give us an insight to some of the thoughts you and your team had about the differences between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4?
Yeah, so I think we have to think why they are already at 3 or 4 at this young age. What is causing these limitations in motor function? Is it maybe the drive to move is less? So there's also less opportunity for your muscles to grow, because it is suggested that if it's a kind of interactive feedback loop, that if you have less input to your muscles to be activated, you will probably develop a bit less in your motor milestones, and these motor milestones such as mechanical loading or weight bearing are important for your muscles to have a stimuli to grow. So this was a bit for us the question, like it's maybe in this loop of interactions that a GMFCS 3-4 is showing more hampered muscle growth. This is still a question we have. What's the chicken or the egg?
Yeah, it really is one of those questions, isn't it?
What do you think, Dana?
Well, see, when I think about 3 and 4, I love how you just said, is it the drive to move and the desire to move? And I do think there's something to be said about how difficult it might be for a child to first start to move in the early days. Up against gravity, the delay in getting on their feet. We know a lot of these children tend to spend a little bit more time on the floor and they're not up on them. Because when we think about medial gastroc, it's that real just standing, that push-off time. And I wonder whether, those early sort of delays in being able to get up because of all the barriers means that they can't actually develop it. Or is it that the muscle itself is weaker and inherently weaker as a result of the injury anyway, and then as a result of that, you can't function as easily. So it's like motivation and drive versus the response to a muscle that's already quite weakened. But then your children with results for GMFs level 1 and 2, often these kids can have a little bit of time to get up on their feet as well, though. If you treat many children with GMFs level 1 and 2 in the first year or two, it can be difficult to get them up on their feet. They tend to want to spend a lot of time on their floor. Yeah. But then the results in your study show that those muscles were looking pretty good, weren't they?
Well, if you observe the figure at 12 months, the GMFs 1 and 2 has still smaller muscle volume.
Right.
But then you see the growth trajectory, and it seems that they catch up a little bit to their typically developing peers.
Interesting.
And we were also wondering, and we couldn't find it yet in the results, if this is also the period, like you're explaining, they're gonna do more weight bearing, they're maybe gonna start walking at the age of 15, 16 months, and maybe because of this like stimulation and experience, they catch up a bit in their muscle cross-sectional area, which we haven't observed at the level of the muscle length. So this we should take into account, that what we also know at an older age, like the cross-sectional area might be of a good size, but the muscle length might be shortened. Yes. And this for function is also very important to understand. So this age of walking and these interactions are still very important to take into account for our future research, if that could influence their pattern of muscle growth. Yeah.
And I love that. I mean, that just gets me thinking so much, because there's been so much debate about, I'm not even sure it's debate. We get our kids up and moving as quickly as possible. So I feel like there's less debate there. But for so long, it hasn't been our first thought is to get kids up and weight bearing, particularly if they're classified within GMFs level 4. You kind of take your time a little bit. But when you get them up and moving, of course, it's not just use atrophy. We're actually pushing and moving, and it's so fundamental to their exploration.
Yeah.
So
it really is chicken and egg, isn't it?
It really is.
I think we were talking about it in the context of neurological development, that the function drives form and form drives function loop. Yeah. It's the same, isn't it?
It's the same thing.
Well, it's not the same, but it's, the same kind of principles, I suppose, potentially apply.
Yeah, I think so. But what I come to with this, which I find interesting, and again, I think I could talk about this for days. It's one of those things where you just go, well, okay, so say it is inherent within the brain injury and the muscle hasn't grown as much. Okay, let's say that. But then we know that for the children classified between 1 and 2, when they started walking past, that 12 months, they could catch up. So there is scope and opportunity if presented. And these are kids who will probably be able to be more ambulant. So the bottom line for me is get them up and moving. But anyway,
also
you go.
The question, if we can prevent a bit the trajectory of this level 3 and 4. If you know what's the consequence, or their motor function.
Yeah. Because you just fall further and further behind, don't you? And that's what we talk about.
Widening.
Yeah, that's right. So if it's not there in the first place, I love it. Well, it goes to my next question really nicely about the clinical implications. And I suppose, again, I wish I was in the room whilst I'm sure all of you in the team are talking about this. But what do you guys think about the optimal timing for initiating these more muscle-targeted interventions for infants with cerebral palsy?
Yeah, I would say definitely before 12 months of age, we have to try to stimulate. And I think we discussed already a few things about that. So yeah, like weight bearing and mechanical loading is known as a stimuli for growth. We also have to take into account this window of neuroplasticity of the brain. So if it's true that the neurological consequences are present on a muscular level, then if we might be able to also change a bit in the brain plasticity and the brain maturation, this might already have an influence on your muscles. So might be a combination of what we know from other studies, that what the intervention is doing on the brain and a targeted muscle study. Maybe we do two things at the same time to improve muscle volume increases. So yeah, I think as early as possible would be for me the same as for other interventions, for example, for the upper limb. I think it's...
Which we talk a lot about in the upper limb. It's so targeted. Can I ask, I mean, obviously my head went straight to weight bearing and walking, using supported stepping devices. What else can we be doing at that early intervention phase, especially if they're, level 3 and 4, where it is a little bit harder.
And you're aware of the fact that there might already be
which I think
differences.
Yeah, exactly.
And deficits in that
do you
area.
think we can do for those kids? Or is it getting up and standing weight bearing is the key? Like what other things? I just don't want to be missing something.
Yeah, the question is, strength training is something we know from older ages, although we have to take into account that needs some instructions, which is very challenging for a baby to specifically ask to do kind of exercise to strengthen the muscle. The same with like the selective motor control is also a component that is important if you want to do a strength exercise. So but I think we should like mimic this a bit for a young age, like during play. I'm thinking of kicking, for example. This could be a play activity, and if there is some resistance where they have to kick to a ball or some other like toys, it could maybe reinforce their muscle growth. But unfortunately, we don't have results about type of interventions. But I think we could think from this insights of older children and knowing what a child of this age of for example, 6 to 8 months is doing, try to implement a kind of treatment.
And that's the key, isn't it? Like for the age group they were talking about, play-based. It has to be play-based, doesn't it? Or else it's
how are you going to do it?
Yeah.
Because they still need to, like, all the F words are still relevant. You can't be making it overly prescriptive, because it's a very delicate period in a child and the family's life as they come into terms with the diagnosis and what this means for them. So it still needs to be framed within all of that too, right? Because this is earlier than we've ever had to look at before. Because we have early detection now. So that we have to keep that framing.
For sure.
Can I ask a question about AFOs? Because I feel like that's a question that many people would ask, right? So AFOs are such a big part of the pathway and prescription. And then we've had these debates. Actually, I think I had the debate early just this morning with a parent. It was like, I've been using my AFOs for 8 hours in a day. And I've done it since the beginning. That's what I was told to do. But it makes it really hard for him to stand and really hard for him to take steps in his walker. Thoughts on AFOs, because that is directly, that's ankle, that's gastrocs in terms of length and strengthening opportunities. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's difficult because we don't have, from what I know, data about this. Also in older children, even AFO would influence your muscle volumes or difficult question. I'm not sure I have the answers to that. Also in our group, I think we had only a few that had this AFOs. Because the age of mobility was also after 15 to 16 months. So
sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can help you with this.
No, that's okay. Again, it's like a new issue, I suppose, because if children back in the day, which was only probably about 5 years ago, weren't getting diagnosed till say 18 months to 2 years, AFOs would follow maybe 6 months later. So we're putting them on far later.
Yeah.
But if we are diagnosing earlier, are we doing AFOs earlier? And does that prevent opportunities from, I'm not saying they're not important, but do we also want them to move and plan to flex and squat and all those strengthening things we're talking about? So anyway, that's just another postdoc study for you, Nathalie, for the next time. We'll discuss it later.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll be in it with you. I love it.
Yeah. Just coming back to the brain lesion, we touched on the timing of the brain lesion and the distinction between white matter injury and grey matter injury, as a variable. Can you just unpack your findings for us around those early versus late lesions and how that potentially impacts the growth trajectories?
Yeah, so if I start again with like the onset of alterations, we observed that it was irregardless the brain lesion that these children have a smaller muscle volume. But then when we look to the growth trajectories, there was not so much difference between them. So for us, it seems also a bit the way we look to the brain, it's maybe a bit too narrow, let's say, to only look to an early or late timing. Maybe if we have more information about the location of the brain lesion, the extent of the brain lesion. We know that's also very heterogeneous between the children. Even at GMFCS level 2 could have different lesions. So it might be that our results are a bit too narrow, or the way we look to the brain lesion would not be too much informative. But anyway, it's what they have, the brain lesion, and if you compare them to typically developing children, it's changing their muscles. But I think we can do more with the brain imaging in future research to understand their relations to muscle growth.
That's beautiful.
That makes sense. And because it is so heterogeneous, like you say, you probably need quite a significant number of children to be involved in a study that answers a big question like that. So maybe that's another postdoc.
That's another one. Here we go. So many more questions that come from it. A final question for me about it, because I thought that was really interesting. In the discussion, you talked a lot about the interplay between neural input, mechanical loading, and potentially nutritional and hormonal influences, which is something that we don't really ever talk about. No. Talk to us about that. Like, what does this mean? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so I think for nutrition, we have to, and it's also what we know from adults, that protein intake could probably stimulate your muscle growth if you combine this with a strength training. So that's why we're it's also some research ongoing in Leuven about the influence of nutrition on muscle growth. And for these young children, we know like preterms in the hospital, they need some adaptations in their nutritional plan. And a muscle need the protein intake and is needed for your protein synthesis of a muscle. So that's why nutrition is coming along with this muscle development. But I think it's also, for other things in CP, the problem it's multifactorial influences. And I think that's what we have to take into account, but makes it also very difficult to study, of course, to know which factor is influencing more, and probably the factors are interrelated or intercausal. So it's not so easy, but I think we have some aspects now, like the neural input, the mechanical loading, nutrition, that we maybe first have to focus on before we dive into other factors.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. It's exciting.
So Nathalie, you're a postdoc now, and being a postdoc means that you have come out of a PhD with loads more questions than when you started. So talk to us about the next steps for your research and, what the work that you and your research team are doing. Do you follow this cohort of children that you worked with further? Do you expand the study to look at interventions? What kinds of things are you doing at the moment?
Yeah. So in this cohort, it's indeed continuously follow-up, and then also interaction with nutrition and physical activity, especially also from they achieve the age of 4 to 5 years.
Wow.
In my research, I dive a bit more to the chicken or egg story in a way that I'm measuring infants from a very young age. So actually, I'm collecting muscle growth data from preterm born babies around 35, 36 weeks of gestation with a follow-up during their first year of life. So to know this, like, is it really earlier than 12 months of age? This is what's, for me, my priority in my research in comparison to typically developing children. Yeah, so we try to know from as early as possible. Of course, we when they're born preterm, I want to measure them when they have a stable medical condition. That was important. And I'm also relating this to the brain, but also to the movements. So I'm also collecting general movements at term age and 3 months to understand if like we said with the 3 and 4s, if the movements are already altered and there is an altered muscle, then we might have maybe 2 aspects where we can do the treatment on. Maybe the muscles are not yet altered, so we have still some time to avoid these alterations. So this is a bit more the research I'm doing now to understand how early are we able to observe alterations in muscle growth.
That's fascinating.
I love that you look so excited about it, because it's a lot of work. So you need a lot of
excited about it.
It's so good. Okay, so we'll be talking about this for years to come as we follow them up.
Yeah.
That is absolutely brilliant. Now, we're going to head to our final segment, and I've already seen Ed protesting on the side. I'll tell you all why already, because we're going to head to Tell It to Ed. Ed, as you know, is our producer. He doesn't have a background in child health, but he has been listening in on this conversation, and he's been obviously taking notes, and he's just put up a note. The question I asked you last about nutrition, he's like, that was my question for you. So, so now he's probably panicking and thinking about what he might ask next. So to give him a bit of an opportunity, Nathalie, I'll get you to summarize this area in about 60 seconds or so. And Ed, over to you for a question, and I'm really sorry. Okay. Over to you, Nathalie.
So in our study, we did like a follow-up. So we measured children during their development from 6 months to 36 months of age, understanding how the volume and the length of their calf muscle would change over time. And we observed, if you compare children with the diagnosis of spastic cerebral palsy, that they have a smaller muscle volume at the age of 12 months in comparing with their typically developing peers. What we also observed with our ultrasound measurements is that the muscle growth trajectory, so how muscle volumes are changing when children get older, that these trajectories are more or less similar as typically developing children, but we observe that still the muscles are smaller over time. And also children with more limitations in motor function have a lower muscle growth rate over time in comparison to children with a bit more motor function abilities. So with our study, where we did a longitudinal follow-up, we highlight that muscles are important to observe next to the neurological consequences, and that this might give room to also stimulate the muscle growth with some, for example, play activities to either prevent further hampered muscle growth or even improve their muscle volumes.
Very comprehensive. Thank you very much. All right, Ed, I'm sorry. I should have known that would be a question that you would like to have asked. Sorry. But over to you. I'm sure you have another one, right? Always.
Look, there was always going to be a time when I ran out of questions.
Surely not.
I usually make notes as we're going through the pod, and I tend to cross them out as the questions already get asked by our amazing hosts.
It's what we do.
Yeah. And unfortunately, fortunately, you've been very, very good at this. And I think I'm going to have to take like a very kind of strange approach to this. So my question is, if you could imagine like a muscle growth tracker app, maybe for parents of kids with cerebral palsy, and based on your ultrasound findings, like what could that potentially look like? Like how could maybe something like this help families to understand and support their child's muscle development, and maybe even in like a fun or motivational way? I don't know if that's a good question.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, because if we want to do some monitoring, and I think parents love apps and smart watches and these types of tools to monitor their child or their own physical fitness. So yeah, I think this is a very valid question. And yeah, there could be a future of some mobile ultrasound devices. There are some already on the market that you can just connect to your iPhone or an iPad. I think we should look for that to like the mid-belly cross-sectional area. Just don't ask parents to do a full muscle sweep, but if we can have an idea of in the mid-belly region of the muscle, what's the cross-sectional area, and I think with the current AI technology, we can also have like some kind of automatic segmentation of this cross-sectional area. I think this could be for clinicians as well. Very interesting tool in their follow-up clinics to measure mid-belly cross-sectional area and understand already have a kind of indication if this muscle is in a good health or not. So
I think you guys came up with a great idea. I no longer apologize for taking your last question.
Take that all back, Dana.
Yeah, take it back, because that pushed you that little bit further, Ed, to ask a really relevant question.
I'm still sweating.
No, but
you can have little pop-ups with play-based ideas, how to promote strengthening of the muscle.
Ash, I think that's good. And like, it's a single case experimental design, and you can measure it over time, and then you can have these opportunities to document what things are looking like.
Write that down. Let's talk.
Yeah. Let's do it. This is a grant application.
Will I get a credit on this particular project?
No, probably not, because you sweated too much over it.
Okay.
Should have just been more confident with it.
No, we're very collaborative here, Ed, of course.
That was actually really good, Ed. That was really good. Like I said, I take back my apology.
Yeah.
You asked a great question.
You always do.
I wish I asked that question.
The run continues.
The run continues. It sort of increases the pressure.
We tried to trip him up.
We did.
But he comes out on top again.
Nathalie, I think you answered that very well as well. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast this week and sharing these amazing results and really getting us all excited about muscle growth and development.
Yeah, and we're really looking forward to hearing about what comes out next from you and your team and all the really exciting work that you're still doing in this space.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you very much also for this this call. It was amazing to share my interest and our research results about muscle growth.
It's so good, isn't
I'm happy
it?
to share in the future.
Great.
Good. It's nice to give people a bit more time, because you think about a conference presentation, you jam it all into 7 minutes and sometimes 6 minutes. So it's good to have just talked it through. So thank you for doing that. To all of our listeners, we'll put a link for this on our website, researchworks.net. And if you head over to our website, researchworks.net, you'll see some new features, including a search function of keywords to find episodes that are relevant to you. So now that we have so many episodes, it just takes some of that time out of finding what you're interested in, because there's so much to look at. So head over there and take a look at what Nathalie has been doing.
Yeah.
But for now,
the rest of the back catalogue.
There's a lot of them. So we'll talk to you all again really soon. Thank you once again, Nathalie.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you to all of our listeners.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.